Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our session, Getting Started on NHLBI BioData Catalyst, where we will be going over why BioData Catalyst was built, what it offers, and how you can get started. I want to thank you for attending today's session. I am Amber Vogt, and I am a user engagement specialist at the BioData Catalyst Coordinating Center at the Renaissance Computing Institute, otherwise known as RENCI, at UNC Chapel Hill. I also want to mention that I will be adding a link in the chat to this presentation, so any resources or links that I mentioned that you might want to look at further will be available for you there. Before we get started, this is a brief disclosure to let you know that I have no financial relationship with relevant companies to disclose. So let's start with a brief overview of today's session. You likely saw some sessions earlier about BioData Catalyst, so you should be at least somewhat familiar with what it is and what it can be used for. In this session, we will cover how you can get started with the platform. We'll first have an introduction to BioData Catalyst. Then we'll talk about access to the ecosystem, which includes the different accounts and approvals that you will need depending on what you want to do. We will then go over cloud credits and the cost of using BioData Catalyst. Then we'll talk about where to find more information about the platform, including our website and documentation resources. Lastly, we will go over how and why you can get involved in our community. I will be saving some time at the end of the session for questions, so if you could please hold any questions that might arise until the end of our session, that would be greatly appreciated. So first, let's start with an introduction. We'll talk about how data in recent years has been growing extraordinarily fast and the need that has arisen for the BioData Catalyst ecosystem to help facilitate research. We'll then have a brief overview of how the platform works. So let's start by talking about the motivation for creating BioData Catalyst. We are in the age of big data. The rate of data generation is accelerating extremely quickly, and the medical field is no exception. Actually, more biomedical data will be generated this year than all previous years combined. And there are many diverse data modalities collecting more and more data. There's health data, surveys, imaging, and so on. And as you can see from the chart, what would have taken years for data generation previously now just takes days. And this is great, but researchers need the proper resources for storing and analyzing data. We need a way to do something with the data. We also need a way to have easily reproducible data, and we want to bring researchers to the cloud and allow people to work on data together. And even more specifically, as you can see from this slide, the growth in top-med data is also accelerating extremely fast. You can see that the number of samples and the file sizes have grown tremendously in just a few years. And as I said on the previous slide, new data is great, but the explosion of clinical and research data in recent years has led to new challenges for researchers. So today, the cloud is the most effective way to store and analyze our growing health data corpus. Looking at the graphic on the right, we are shifting from an old model where users have their own data sets, and they're usually quite small, that they would send to compute. And you might complete your analysis, send back some results. And if you want to share data, you'd have to send it to other researchers, and that cycle would just continue. Now we have a central compute structure for not only data sets, but for tools and workflows as well. So people can come into BioData Catalyst and just begin to work. And there's many advantages to this. First, it immediately scales. For example, there's no need for your team to purchase and install new hardware or software, or to worry about service agreements and upgrades, nothing like that. Secondly, it levels the playing field. Not all institutions have a budget for their computing infrastructure to access and analyze such a wealth of data. So you don't have to be someone that has access to only elite compute infrastructure in order for you to complete your research. Thirdly, because it is cloud-based, most researchers are able to access the data without needing to physically copy it. The more you copy and send data, the more the file mutates. So we can be sure that we're all referring to the same data sets and that they're not out of sync when we have our data stored in the cloud. Lastly, having the data and methods in a single place streamlines its reproducibility. So say you use a certain approach for a problem, everyone can access that approach and view its results. They don't have to take time to go and recreate it. So the explosion of clinical and research data in recent years has led to a need for cloud storage and analysis. Data use agreements limit the ability to analyze data. Moving data is difficult, it's time consuming, and it's expensive. So we need to have an infrastructure that allows researchers to bring tools and workflows to the data, not the other way around. And this is exactly why BioData Catalyst was developed. NHLBI initiated this effort about 3 years ago to address the needs of the HLBS research community. The mission is to develop and integrate advanced cyber infrastructure, leading edge tools, and fair data to support the NHLBI research community. The vision is to be a community-driven ecosystem, implementing data science solutions to democratize data and computational access to advance heart, lung, blood, and sleep science. So within BioData Catalyst, our development efforts are purposefully user-centric. This keeps us focused on driving scientific outcomes, which are, after all, aimed at ultimately improving the lives of our patients. And additionally, we work in close partnership with dbGaP to facilitate data access according to their existing processes and to make use of a number of their data services. We also actively work with a number of other NIH data resources to ensure alignment. So now that we have a greater understanding of why BioData Catalyst was created and the need that researchers have for this ecosystem, let's have a brief overview of how it all works together. And ultimately, we want to remember, we just want to improve patient outcomes. So we have different types of users and researchers working with all different types of data. For example, genomics, clinical data, imagery, all this data is available in a cloud-based platform that provides tools, applications, and workflows in secure workspaces. We're committed to collaborative efforts. For example, we have tooling for workspaces for collaborators to work together with the same data sets. All of these features help accelerate efficient biomedical research that drives discovery and scientific advancement, which can lead to new or better diagnostics, therapeutic options, and prevention strategies. And this is all ultimately in the effort of providing better outcomes for patients. So the BioData Catalyst ecosystem is a cloud-based platform that provides tools, applications, and workflows in secure workspaces. It's designed to be nimble and responsive to the ever-changing conditions of the biomedical and data science communities. So what does BioData Catalyst offer? Well, it offers elastic computing, so you pay for what you use, no matter how large or small your research is. It's not prohibited by the system that you have access to. It offers easier access to many high-value data sets. There's both open and controlled data. Open data, you need an ERA Commons ID for, which we'll go over in just a little while, and the controlled data, you need dbGaP approval. It also has multiple tooling options. There's an interactive browser for exploring data sets and variables. We have statistical analysis tools, and beyond that, there are a number of other specialized workflows. And because we are a user-centric endeavor, we offer the opportunity to be involved in the BioData Catalyst community, which we will discuss in more detail later in this session. But we have a lot of interaction that happens between users. Maybe you want to have inspiration for your research. Maybe you're just looking to receive some additional help and so on. This is a huge asset for our users as the community that we're building. So let's talk about the community, or the computing environment. There's no need to download and manage multiple large data sets. There's no computer system to manage, so you don't have to worry about upgrading your infrastructure or other hardware issues. You only pay for what you use, and we have a dedicated help desk and a wealth of documentation resources available to make sure your work and experience is as seamless as possible. We are truly here to support you and your research. So now that we have an idea of the need for BioData Catalyst and why it was developed, let's get into the session and start talking about access to the ecosystem. We're going to cover available data and accounts and approvals first. The NHLBI BioData Catalyst provides access to a highly secure, scalable, reproducible, collaborative, and extensible cloud data analysis ecosystem, preloaded with more than 3 petabytes of high-value heart, lung, blood, and sleep data. There are also harmonized variables across all of TopMed. So we do have general information about accessing data on the resources page of our BioData Catalyst website. The web resource for that is linked on this slide if you downloaded the slide from the chat. But there are a number of both open and controlled data sets, including TopMed Freeze 5B, TopMed Freeze 8, TopMed related parent studies and dbGaP, and COVID-19 data additionally. So as I mentioned, if you look at this webpage, you can explore the studies and data that is available in BioData Catalyst, as well as view release notes from the latest data release. One critical feature that was proven to be very important for our users is the ability to bring in your own data and additionally your own workflows into the system for analysis alongside our hosted data. So this really expands the kind of work that can be done within the ecosystem. You can upload data for which you have appropriate approval, provided you do not violate the terms of any of your data use agreements. For example, some of our users are bringing in their own dbGaP data that isn't yet available on BioData Catalyst. They do have approval for that. Others are bringing other data sources that are maybe non-dbGaP, and they're working with those to use the tools and resources that we have available on BioData Catalyst. And others are just bringing in a combo of that type of data to do a combined analysis. And if you would like some information on bringing your own data, there's also a web resource listed on this page where you can learn more about that. So let's talk about authorization and approvals. BioData Catalyst platforms must be registered for separately, but you can register and log in using an ERA Commons ID just to sign into the platform and access all the different platforms. So you authenticate with your ERA Commons as required by NHLBI. If you want to access our open access data, you can also do that with your ERA Commons ID. An example of data you might access that's considered open access is the 1000 genomes data sets. And if you want to access controlled data, you do need dbGaP approval. Some examples of this type of data are the Jackson Heart studies and the MESA studies. If you do not yet have dbGaP access, you can submit a data access request to dbGaP to be authorized to access that data. So we do have a documentation resource for understanding our access requirements. And if you need to get dbGaP access, you would go to their website and submit a request. So we covered quite a bit there, but how do you find more information on data, accounts, and approvals? Well, you can check what data you have access to right away on our website, as long as you have an ERA Commons ID. You can learn how to bring your own data in, if that's something that interests you right away. You can also view our documentation on understanding access, and that will help you understand the approvals and authorizations you need, depending on the data that you want to work with. And just a reminder that these slides are in the chat window, so it's easy for you to access all of these links. Okay, moving on, we'll talk about cloud credits. We'll talk about what cloud credits are. We'll talk about pilot funding, receiving additional credits, and the cloud credits workflow. So first, let's go over what cloud credits are. Users are not charged for the storage of hosted data sets. However, if the hosted data is used in analyses, you will incur costs for computation and storage of any derived results. So computation versus storage. Computation costs are influenced by the compute instance size, the duration for which the instance is used, and the cloud provider's pricing of the compute instance at the time of execution. Storage costs, on the other hand, are influenced by file size, the duration the file was used, and the cloud provider's pricing of the storage class. And if you do upload or import your own data to the system, there's cost for uploaded files as well. And if you want to read more about cloud credits, we do have a web resource linked here. So new users of BioData Catalyst may apply for an initial $500 in cloud credits, which we refer to as pilot credits. And many analyses can be completed for that amount or less. If you have a bigger research project you're doing, you may use the $500 in cloud credits to test and evaluate BioData Catalyst for your research needs. For example, piloting pipelines on smaller samples and estimating how much full analyses will cost. So the pilot credits may be applied to one workspace environment, either BioData Catalyst powered by 7 Bridges or BioData Catalyst powered by Terra, or you can actually choose to divide your credits between both if you want to try out both platforms. Do note that it can take a few business days for cloud credit requests to be approved and actually applied to the workspaces. So just keep that in mind when you complete this form. So if your pilot funding has been exceeded, the $500 pilot funding that you start with, you must cover your own cost. If you decide that BioData Catalyst will be helpful with your research, the BioData Catalyst community does have resources available to help you write the request into your grant proposal. There is additional cloud credits that can possibly be applied for to support certain research in the heart, lung, blood, and sleep fields. So the cloud credits workflow. First, you'll sign up for the BioData Catalyst community, which we will talk about at the end of this session. After you've registered for the community, you will sign up for a workspace, assuming you have an ERA Commons ID. And then you can fill out the cloud credits request form. And then for pilot credits, you'll select either one platform or you'll split your credits between the two. Again, after your pilot credits have been exceeded, you will need to apply for additional credits or pay yourself. So sign up for the community, sign up for a workspace, apply for pilot credits, and then apply for additional credits if you did need to if you had further costs. Okay, so we've talked about cloud credits and pilot funding. What do you do now? Well, you can learn more about cloud credits and refer to resources for understanding and estimating credits on our website. On the same page of this website, you can fill out a request form for cloud credits in order to receive an initial $500 in pilot funds. And remember to do this only after you have signed up for a workspace, either 7Bridges or Terra, and that you can put the credits on a single platform or split the funds between platforms. As always, feel free to contact our help desk with any questions you might have, whether it's about what cloud credits are or if you need help estimating the cost of a project. Now we'll talk a little bit about where to find more information about BioData Catalyst. Our website has a great variety of resources, including links to our documentation, learning modules, and tutorials, as well as accessing information on the various platforms of the ecosystem. We have information about data and even more. The first page I will mention is the services page. This page has all you need to connect to and learn about the platforms and services available in the ecosystem. It will help guide you through the various components. So exploring available data, using Gen 3 and Picture, analyzing data using 7Bridges and Terra, and using community tools from DocStore and Helix. This page also includes links to launch the various parts of the ecosystem, as well as links for documentation and learning modules for each. The next page is our Learn page. Here you can get started on the BioData Catalyst ecosystem with our collection of documentation, videos, frequently asked questions, community forums, tutorials, blog posts, upcoming events, and more from our ecosystem partners. So many of the questions you might have as a new user may already be answered on this webpage or from our documentation. You can also access our documentation in GitBook. Again, there is a link on this slide for you to conveniently access it. We have instructions on the approvals and accounts needed to access BioData Catalyst and how to check your data access. There's also user guides for Picture, Gen 3, 7Bridges, Terra, and DocStore. So this is a very handy link to have, is our documentation in GitBook. This is also a really good starting point for new users. So we've covered a lot about the many resources that we have available. What would you do now? Well, you could view the services page to learn about and launch all of the components of the BioData Catalyst ecosystem. You could view the Learn page to get started with our collection of learning materials, such as tutorials, documentation, videos, our forums, and our frequently asked questions. And you can also access our documentation library. So lastly, let's talk about how you can get involved in the community. We'll talk about community engagement and support, our guide, and how you can get started today. As mentioned earlier, though the primary goal of our project is to build a data science platform, at its core, this is a very people-centric endeavor. BioData Catalyst is also building a community of practice working to collaboratively solve technical and scientific challenges. And this is really all about what users want and what they want to do. We have a very user-driven, vibrant community. There's peer-to-peer mentoring available. We have support for each of the platforms. So if you're using 7Bridges, if you're using Terra, Picture, or Gen 3, there's always somebody available to help you with a question. We have a great community forum, and actually next month we will be launching a community hours. We'll have webinars, and there's also a Slack channel, which is more informal chat, and you can ask questions and chat there as well, and there's almost always somebody online. When you first sign up for the ecosystem, you'll receive an email with resources to help get you acclimated. One of them is the guide. This might be one of the most beneficial resources for you to become familiar with BioData Catalyst platforms and services and how they all interconnect, and which may be the most helpful for you in your research. So the guide is an interactive PDF. You must download the guide in order to interact with it. But for example, the guide might help you choose which workspace you want to start your analysis in. Maybe you're a brand new user and you want to just learn how you should navigate the ecosystem. Maybe you only are here to work with data. Well, there's a workflow in the guide for you. So this kind of will help get you started and let you understand how all the platform and services work together. And again, this is emailed to you after joining the ecosystem. Okay, now that we've gone over the high-level steps needed to get started on BioData Catalyst, we've gone over data and data access, we've gone over authorizations, we've talked about how to request pilot credits and where you can learn more. What is your actual next step if you wanted to get started right now after this session? Well, the first thing you would do is register for our community, as I mentioned, and you can do this right now today. We have a very short registration form. And once you register for the community, you will have access to all the great things I've mentioned throughout this session. So note, you can still join the community even if you do not have an ERA Commons account yet. The ERA Commons account is for you to sign up for the workspaces and for you to access any open data, but to join our community today, you do not need an ERA Commons account. If you did not download the slides, the URL is biodatacatalyst.nih.gov/contact/ecosystem. And once you join our community, as I mentioned, you will receive our guide, and you'll also receive a help desk account and access to our forums. And you'll also be able to stay updated on new releases, any tips and tricks we might have, future events such as our community hours that I mentioned, and our opportunities of interest. And the community hours that we'll be launching next month will start covering things like onboarding, exploring and accessing data, budgeting for future cloud cross after your pilot credits end, and things like that. So you definitely want to sign up to make sure you can stay involved in these updates. So after you've joined our community, assuming you do have an ERA Commons account, you would then sign up for the workspaces of your choice. You can sign up for 7Bridges or Terra or both. You would then apply for cloud credits. Note that it takes a few business days for approval of those. But even before you receive your cloud credits, you can get started just exploring the data. So even without those credits, you can start accessing and practicing in the workspaces. You just cannot perform any analyses. And that is the end of our Getting Started on BioData Catalyst session. I'd like to open it up now for any questions you might have about the ecosystem or any of the steps we talked about for getting started.